Let's jump right into this explainer and investigate what is arguably the ultimate psychological puzzle in all of literature. Today, we're taking a detective's look into a deeply contradictory mind, a protagonist whose very existence completely challenges our understanding of human nature.
So we really have to ask ourselves, is it actually possible for a cold-blooded, calculating killer to simultaneously be a selfless, bleeding heart savior? Which of these two identities is the real person, and which is just a mask? You know, our brains are hardwired to solve puzzles, but this particular suspect's behavior absolutely defies simple logic. On one hand, you have a brutal murderer, and on the other, a man who literally gives his last penny to a complete stranger. How on earth do we reconcile this?
Well, Dostoevsky actually plants the thesis right in the protagonist's name, giving us the literal key to unlock the whole text. Raskolnikov isn't just some random assortment of syllables. It's derived from the Russian word raskol, which means a split, a cleavage, or a schism. Right from the title page, we are dealing with a mind completely divided against itself.
And this split works on three distinct levels. First, his crime isn't just a break from the law, it's a profound break from humanity itself. The term Raskol carries incredibly heavy historical weight, directly evoking the Great Schism of the Russian Orthodox Church back in the 1660s. Psychologically, it's his internal divide. And etymologically, it's a really dark pun on cutting and cleaving, which perfectly mirrors his weapon of choice, the axe.
You know, Dostoevsky's naming is never idle. Every single character's name serves as a miniature argument deliberately planted in the text. Take his friend Razumikhin, whose name is rooted in reason and good sense. Or Luzhin, whose name literally evokes a shallow, dirty puddle. Even Sonia Marmeladova has a surname reminiscent of sugar-sweet fruit jelly, which contrasts sharply with her incredibly grim situation. He is basically setting up a philosophical chessboard right in front of us.
And this doubleness isn't some subtle hidden theme you have to guess at. Dostoevsky states his thesis outright, through a shrewd, albeit drunken, diagnosis by Raskolnikov's friend, Razumikhin. He points out that it's as though two opposite characters are alternating inside him. The author puts the exact premise of the book right into the dialogue, tells us exactly what he's doing, and then spends 500 pages dramatizing it.
So, let's bounce between these two extremes and look at the cold, hard facts. Because if you were the detective on this case, you'd very quickly find that neither side of his personality is lacking in evidence. The sheer scale of this psychological divide is honestly staggering.
First, take his clinical, calculated actions as the theorist. It is incredibly easy to assume we're dealing with a pure sociopath here. He publishes an essay on the theory of crime months in advance. He conducts a literal rehearsal of the murder, pacing out exactly 730 steps. He sews a hidden loop inside his coat for his axe, crafts a fake cigarette case pledge for a distraction, and slaughters a second, completely innocent woman without even stopping, later referring to his primary victim as a mere louse. All to see if he had the right to do it.
But then, abruptly shift your focus to his overwhelming compassion. Notice that acts like saving 2 children from a burning house, where he suffered burns himself, happened long before the murder, proving they aren't driven by guilty remorse. He spontaneously gives away his last 20 rubles to a ruined family. He pays for a stranger's funeral. Even his subconscious reveals a desperate hatred of cruelty, like when he dreams of kissing a beaten mare's bloody muzzle and fighting its abuser.
The wildest part? This split exists within a single gesture. He'll impulsively hand over all his money to strangers out of deep empathy, only for his rational half to immediately regret it. The generous man acts, and literally a split second later, the cold theorist steps in to audit the emotion, calling himself a fool for wasting the money. They coexist in the exact same brain, fighting for the steering wheel in real time.
Now we can confidently rule out the idea that either side is just a fake mask. People often assume either the killer is a pose covering a good heart or the charity is just sentimental self-deception. But neither is true. His brutal theory survives the intense pressure of 18 months in a Siberian prison, proving it's not a temporary pose. And his extreme acts of charity happen completely unwitnessed, and he actively resents doing them. Both pass the novel's rigorous test of authenticity.
Dostoevsky actually physically builds this split into the story through externalized doubles. Characters like Svidrigailov and Razumikhin represent exactly what our protagonist would be if you amputated his psyche into single halves. Svidrigailov is pure, terrifying theory totally detached from human warmth. Razumikhin is pure, loyal warmth unburdened by complex theory. And this brilliantly drives home the novel's core implication. To be fully human requires holding on to this incredibly painful split. Look at what happens to the doubles. Svidrigailov ultimately shoots himself, while Razumikhin just settles down into an ordinary life. Resolving this incredible tension by simply cutting off one half leads to either spiritual death or to complete ordinariness.
The very style of the book enacts his unstable mind through a technique called free indirect discourse. Because the narration slides directly in and out of Raskolnikov's chaotic thoughts, it makes it impossible to locate the boundary between the character's judgment and the narrator's. Dostoevsky purposefully denies us a stable vantage point. We are trapped in the delirium with him, unable to objectively declare which version of him is the correct one.
This unresolved split is fundamentally woven into the book's DNA through what Mikhail Bakhtin coined polyphony back in 1929. This is a literary form with many genuinely independent consciousnesses. Dostoevsky doesn't just use his characters as puppets to prove a point. The ideas are embodied in people who genuinely argue with each other, and the author does not step in like a referee to settle the argument or put his thumb on the scale.
Now, this format definitely has its critics. Vladimir Nabokov famously called it a shoddy literary trick. He argued that pairing a murderer and a prostitute to read the gospel together was a melodramatic contrivance, asserting doubleness rather than actually earning it. It's a sharp critique, suggesting this whole psychological intensity is just theatrical manipulation.
But to remain completely impartial, the strongest defense against that critique is that this isn't just a clinical case study of one man, it's a diagnosis of the 1860s. Russian society at the time was suffering a severe schism between new modern Western theories and a pre-modern moral inheritance. Raskolnikov represents a deeply ingrained moral conscience trying to house a cold utilitarian idea. The culture was split, so the protagonist absolutely had to be split.
As we approach the resolution, notice how the grand debates simply fade away. Instead of dialectics, we get life. Nobody ever actually out-argues the theorist. Not Razumikhin, not Porfiry, not Sonya. Porfiry doesn't defeat him with logic, he just advises him to take his suffering without conceding a premise. Sonya doesn't offer a philosophical counterargument, she offers an embrace. The brutal ideology isn't intellectually refuted, it is simply outlived.
Tracing the timeline proves the confession wasn't some sudden, magical conversion. Day 1 is the murder. Months later, the confession at the police station. But even then, he spends 18 months completely unrepentant in a Siberian prison, believing his only crime was weakness. The true turning point comes years later, a completely wordless turn by a river, without a single logical argument being made.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Does the epilogue actually close the schism, or does Dostoevsky merely promise that it will close in a different story? Perhaps he refused to show the actual healing because he was being brutally honest about what he just couldn't dramatize. Or maybe he was employing his refusal of dialectics one last brilliant time, leaving us wondering if a deeply fractured mind can ever truly be healed in theory, or if salvation only happens in the messy, wordless reality of life.